Hello and welcome to yet another video. This is the 8th episode in which, rather than Hinata's father, a young Uzumaki Naruto foils Kumo's kidnapping attempt. However, he receives a severe wound in the process, jeopardizing his shinobi career. That is, if not for a certain fox stepping in and offering Naruto the Hokage to be a reward for his heroism. Witness Naruto's newfound power and unique perspective. This story comes from StorySeeker7. Make certain to support him, her. Please like and subscribe to show your support. Let's get the show started. Konoha streets, I'll take 3. Yes, I want them wrapped. Here you go. Please come again. Thank you. Izumi said, taking her order from the shopkeeper. She carefully placed the objects in her basket alongside the rest of her bounty. Bowing to the man, she left the stall and strolled down the busy streets of the village. It was a bright and warm day. There were a few clouds hanging in the sky, but they were scattered and few. A nice day, she had thought, for a little shopping trip. She and her boyfriend would have a dinner date tomorrow, and she wanted to make it special. Particularly now that she had some special news for him. She wondered how Itachi would react when she told him. A devious smile crept onto her lips. Who knows, maybe it would be one of the few things that would cause him to panic. Or even faint dead away. Izumi wondered how much a good camera was going for these days. It was while strolling through the busy streets that she spotted a familiar figure. Smiling to herself, she walked to greet them. Afternoon, Shizen-san. The black-haired medic Nin started for a second and turned to face Izumi. The woman relaxed when she saw who was greeting her. Izumi-san, she said with a smile. I didn't expect to see you out here. It's good to see you. How have you been? Izumi nodded. Very good, actually. I was just wandering around when I saw you and thought to say hi. Her eyes wander over to the basket in Shizen's arms. It mostly had an assortment of fruits and vegetables, but she did catch a glimpse of several bottles at the bottom. The Uchiha woman formed a devious smile. I see you're getting some supplies for Tsunade-sama. She said. For a moment, Shizen's smile faltered. Ah, yes. She began. I was doing some shopping to restock. When I remembered that my sensei was getting low on her drinks. You know how she gets when she doesn't have a bottle to down at the end of a day. Izumi chuckled as a sweat drop rode down the back of her head. I think the whole village knows how she gets. She said. One memory popped into her mind. The young medic Nin in training seemed to have the same thought. Evident by the way she groaned. Oh, please don't remind me. She said, exasperated. I couldn't show my face to the village for a month. I had to disguise myself just to escape the snickers and hushed whispers. Don't worry about it. Izumi said. Besides, I think the ANBU were more embarrassed by it than you were. Somewhere unseen, a shadow stiffened. The one comfort I had out of the whole thing. Shizen said. So, you can imagine I'm more than a bit motivated to make sure that never happens again. Then the woman investigated Izumi's basket. I see that you're also getting some supplies. Don't you Uchiha do your own shopping in your compound? Izumi nodded. Normally, I would. Izumi explained. But there were some things I wanted to get that I can't find at the shops in the Uchiha compound. Plus, ever since the incident. She skirted around the issue. 2 years ago, our clan head encouraged us to interact with the rest of the village. A few of our shops have even moved out and set up business in the village. I can see how that can help mend relations. Shizen commented. Ma'am, your order is ready. The shopkeeper behind her said. Will there be anything else? Shizen turned to face the man and took the bag in his hands. Thank you. She said, depositing the bag away. And no, that will be all. The man nodded and faced Izumi. What about you, young lady. Can I interest you in anything? He said, gesturing over the items in his stall. Izumi looked over the stall full of different vegetables, fresh, judging by how they looked and smelled. She shook her, not finding anything that caught her interest. I'm afraid not, she said. But I may come some other day and buy a few things, she added. The nodded man, disappointed but understood. It will be my honor, he said. Both of you, have a good day. You too, Izumi said. Both women left the stall and strolled through the streets. So, what's the special occasion? Shizun asked. Special occasion? Izumi asked coyly. Oh, this? She left her up a little. What? A lady can't do some shopping without having a reason? Shizun smiled and rolled her eyes. Maybe, she said. But I get the feeling that you have some special reason for being out here today. So, spill it. Izumi chuckled. All right. You got me, she said, lowering her basket. Itachi and I are having a dinner date tomorrow, and I want to make it something special. Not to mention I have something I want to tell him. She placed a hand on her stomach. Shizun blinked, taking a moment to register what she said and a little longer to realize what she meant. Her eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. What? Izumi smiled. That's right. Hokage Tower, and that is the end of our report. The Hokage nodded. Well done, Team 12. He said to the Jonin sensei and his genin team. All four bowed to their Hokage. Your payments should arrive sometime tomorrow. Now get some rest, you deserve it. Yes, Hokage-sama. All three genin said. Hokage-sama. Their Jonin sensei said. Before we conclude this debriefing, I would like to put in a special commendation for one of my students. Next to him, Itachi saw the Hokage raise an eyebrow and share a sideways glance with him. Itachi returned the glance. Both had expected this after reading the reports. Go on, Itachi said, picking up for the Hokage. The Jonin sensei looked at one of his students. A young man around 16, sort of plain looking with brown hair that swept past his ears and green eyes that gleamed with life. Though they did have a slight dullness to them, something that only came after years in the Shinobi Corps. Like the rest of his teammates, his face and arms were littered with bruises and medical patches. Hataru-san did a splendid job, the Jonin continued. While I was incapacitated, he took a leading role and fended off the enemy attack. If it weren't for him, the client and one or both of his teammates would have been killed. Said Genin blushed and turned his head away. I didn't do all that much, he said. Don't listen to him, Hokage-sama. The Jonin sensei continued. I recommend that he receive a bonus on his pay. If necessary, it can be taken from my share of the mission pay. The Jonin stopped his student from protesting. I don't want to hear another word of it. Hataru-san, you did a good job. Now accept the reward that comes with it. The Genin nodded. I guess I'll get to treat my girlfriend to something special, he said. The Jonin sensei smiled at his student and looked back at the Hokage and Itachi. I apologize for my student. He can quite humble at times. The Hokage waved him off. It's all right, the old shinobi said with a closed-eyed smile. Humiliate is a good quality for a shinobi to have. And not one we see enough of. Itachi commented under his breath. Arrogance was all too common in the shinobi ranks for his taste. Pride in one's ability and work were one thing, but having too much of it led to arrogance. Arrogance led to overconfidence, and an overconfident shinobi was often a dead one. Just look at what it did to his clan. You may leave now, the Hokage said, breaking Itachi out of his thoughts. I will consider your request. But if I do decide that your genin deserves a bonus in his pay, it will not come out of your share. Furthermore, you and your team are granted 2-week leave to recuperate from your mission. The Jonin and his genin team bowed to the Hokage. Understood, Hokage-sama. I thank you for your generosity. A moment later, they were gone from the mission room. Not even a moment later, the Hokage lit his pipe and took a smoke. Tell me, Itachi-san. What do you think of this mission report? He asked. Itachi picked up a small stack of papers and scanned over them. The first few were just the overview of the mission, what had happened, and its outcome. Those were the ones they had read during the debriefing. The rest of the stack contained a more detailed version that would be reviewed later. He scanned over it twice more before he responded. I believe that Team 12 did well considering the circumstances. Itachi began. Things could have easily gone wrong, resulting in the death of the client and one or more of the team. The Hokage nodded, showing he agreed with the assessment. Do you believe they have done anything differently? Perhaps a few things. Itachi said. But I do not believe they could have done anything drastically different. They performed well and any mistakes made are a result of experience and not ability. Now what of Hataru-san? The Hokage said. Do you agree with his sensei's recommendation? Itachi nodded as he spoke. I would go with the recommendation that the young man be given accommodation and a bonus to his pay. The reports from his teammates and the client collaborate with his Jonin sensei's report. It's possible that the mission would have fallen apart if he had not taken a leading role while his sensei was out of commission. Again, the Hokage nodded. Agreed. Hataru-san will receive both an accommodation and pay a bonus for his actions during the mission. He did an excellent job, and such work deserves to be rewarded. Speaking of. The Hokage turned to the last page of his copy of the report. Itachi mirrored the action and knew immediately what the man's next question would be. Now then, what about his Jonin sensei's other recommendation? The one he didn't mention during the debriefing. Itachi scanned over the final line in the report. Recommend that Genin Hataru be promoted to the rank of Chunin, following an exemplary performance during the mission. Performing actions that went above and beyond duty. Failing that, he be placed on the path to promotion to the rank of Chunin. I would not recommend the young man be promoted, Itachi said. Not right away. While he did take a leading role in the mission, he did make some mistakes that, if the enemy managed to exploit, would have resulted in disaster. Again, this is less to do with ability and more with a lack of experience. I would go with the latter part of Jonin sensei's recommendation. The Chunin exams are coming up in 5 months, correct? They are. The Hokage confirmed. They'll be held in Suna this time. He added. Itachi nodded. It is my recommendation that over the next 5 months, Hataru be pushed into a leading role during missions. That way, he can gain much-needed experience. When the Chunin exams come up, Team 12's Jonin sensei can have them enter. Depending on his performance, we can decide if he deserves a promotion then or hold it off until he gains more experience. The Hokage nodded while taking another smoke. Very good, Itachi. He said, removing the pipe and blowing out a puff of smoke. With any luck, we'll soon have another Chunin added to our ranks. Who knows, maybe he'll make Jonin if a few years. I'll send our recommendation to Team 12's Jonin sensei tomorrow. The Hokage stood up from his chair and walked out from behind the table. I would also like you to look over Team 12's records. Try to figure out their strengths and weaknesses and make a report to their Jonin sensei telling him what he can work on with them and how he should push them. Itachi nodded. Yes, Hokage-sama. He said, putting the report away. I'll have it into him by the end of the week. He stood up and walked beside the Hokage, looking out the window. It was a beautiful, peaceful day out in Konoha. Down below in the streets, Itachi could see its people going about their lives. Children laughed, played, and ran all throughout the streets. Men and women milled about going from one building to the next. He saw the familiar figures of shinobi jumping from rooftop to rooftop. A small smile crept onto his lips. It was on days like these that he was reminded why he became a shinobi. He hoped that tomorrow would be just as beautiful. "Something on your mind, Itachi-kun?" the Hokage asked. Without looking away from the window, Itachi answered. "Nothing too much. Just admiring how beautiful the day is. I'm hoping that tomorrow is just as nice." "Oh?" the Sandaime questioned. "Is there any particular reason why?" he asked, but Itachi detected the knowing tone in the older shinobi's voice. Deciding there was no use in hiding it, Itachi nodded. "Me and Izumi plan to have a dinner date tomorrow," he explained. "I'm planning on taking her to the sushi restaurant they opened in the Yuzu district." Now the Hokage was raising an eyebrow. "I hear that place is quite expensive," the Sandaime said, turning to face him. "Not to mention reservations are almost impossible to get. Hayashi-san was me telling the other day that even he had difficulty getting a reservation. And he won't be going for 3 months. You either must have been incredibly lucky or—" The older man let the last part hang in the air. Itachi smiled. The Sandaime may be old, but he had not lost any of his sharpness. "I cashed in a couple of favors and owe a few new ones," he explained vaguely. The Hokage gave him a knowing nod. "So, what's the special occasion?" he asked. "Can't I just treat my girlfriend to something special?" Itachi asked. The Hokage smiled and walked back to his seat. "Knowing you, I would not be surprised if you were just doing this just to make her happy," he said, turning the chair around and taking a seat. "But I suspect that you have something special in mind tomorrow." Itachi tried to keep the blush from spreading to his cheeks as his mind wandered off to a small box hidden in his room. "I suppose I do have something special in mind for her tomorrow," he said. The old Hokage gave him a kindly smile. The kind that a grandfather would give, this being the Sandaime. It wasn't all that far off a description. "So, you finally plan to propose to her?" His question came off as more of a statement. Itachi was not at all surprised that Hokage had figured out his intentions. "We have been together for some time now. About 5 or 6 years. The Hokage chuckled. "I remember how long I was with Biwako before I finally mustered up the courage to marry her. 10 years we courted each other." A nostalgic look morphed across the old man's face. "We were together for more than 30 years before." The Sandaime trailed off and looked up at the ceiling, his smile taking a sad tinge. "Those were some of the happiest years in my life," he said after a moment. Feeling guilt, Itachi spoke up. "I'm sorry if this brought up any bad memories." The Hokage waved him off. "Not to worry, my boy. While it pains my heart to think of her, it also soothes it. Remember, Itachi, we must take the good with the bad. While partings can be sad, and sometimes they bring pain, there is always the promise that we will meet again. When I pass from this world and join the pure world, I have no doubt that my beloved Biwako will be the first to greet me there." The older man sighed. "But enough about my past love life. Tell me, how do you feel about this? Asking Izumi to be your wife?" Itachi thought about it for a moment, wondering how he should answer the Hokage's question. "Honestly," he began, "I feel nervous." The Sandaime smiled. "As you should be," he said. "I felt that taking on all 9 of the Biju would have been less stress-inducing when I proposed to Biwako. And I felt that way all the way to when we finally exchanged our vows. It was a big step that we took. But it was one we took together and the right one for us. As I am sure, it will be for you and Izumi. Itachi nodded. I feel like it is too, he said. But at the same time, I am worried. What if this is not the right choice for us? What if it's too soon? What if she says no? What if later we find out that we're not right for each other? Hundreds of questions swirled around inside him, and he had no way to answer them easily. He had never felt this nervous and worried about something. Not since that night 2 years ago. Itachi, the Hokage began. I asked myself those same questions. And they were not any easier to answer than as they are now. I can't give you those answers, Itachi. But what I can tell you is this. The only way you can find out is to take this step. Then another. And another. Until you look back one day and find that you have answered your questions. What they will be is for you to decide. The Hokage stood up and walked beside Itachi. He was looking out the window. But you will never find these answers if you allow fear to give you pause. Itachi thought about the Hokage's words and knew that he was right. I love her, Itachi said. And I want to spend the rest of my life with her. Then you already know the answer to the first of your questions. The Hokage said sagely. The door behind them opened, and another team walked in to report. I do hope that you have a good day tomorrow. And try to think about what I said. The Hokage turned his attention to the newcomers. Team 5, what can I do for you? Itachi looked out the window for just another second. A small smile crept onto his face as his thoughts wandered over to what was to come for tomorrow. He still felt nervous, still felt that any number of things could go wrong. But after his brief conversation with the Hokage, he felt strangely at peace with that. No matter what came, he would face it and take one step at a time. Itachi stole one last glance at the streets below. It really was beautiful out there, he hoped it would always stay that way. Itachi should have known better. Just as he was turning, just as the Jonin Sensei for the newly arrived Genin team began their report. A section of Konoha was engulfed in fire. Earlier, forest clearing, should I tell them? Or not? That question had plagued Yakumo ever since she arrived in the forest clearing. Before then, she had been so confident in what she had to do. She was going to tell them about her clan's dark secret. About the dangers of her power. About the demon that tormented her every day of her life. She had fantasied about this ever since she woke up. After having a night so restful that, at first, she feared it was some kind of deception from the shadow. Her friends would accept her, Sasuke would accept her. She wouldn't feel so alone in this world anymore. She would finally have someone who understood the burden she bore. Perhaps they would even help her overcome the shadow. In the back of her mind, Yakumo heard a small scoffing noise. She promptly ignored it. It was such a wonderful and peaceful dream that it had her smiling throughout the day. Then she stepped into the forest clearing, and a small seed of doubt sprouted in her. She looked and saw her friends all around her. Ino and Hinata were talking together, chatting away about something. Yakumo didn't know what, clothes maybe? She was only half-heartedly paying attention and participating. Close by, Choji was happily munching away at a bag of chips. Next to him, Shikamaru was lazily watching the clouds. Kiba was next to them, playing with his Ninken Akamaru and watching the spare in front of them. Then her gaze landed on Naruto and Sasuke. Both were in the middle of another of their sparring matches. Sweat was glistening on both boys as they exchanged blows. Her gaze remained fixated on Sasuke. He had done so much for her. He was the first friend she ever had outside of Kurenai. He had been the one to fill the empty void in her heart that she never knew was consuming her. He had introduced her to all his friends, each of whom was wonderful in their own way. They each gave her a reason not to be alone. To feel happier and more content. Would they accept her? Deep down, Yakumo knew that the answer was yes. But doubt and fear still clawed at her. That's because deep down, you know the truth. An all too familiar voice said. They'll betray you. They're just waiting for the right moment. Yakumo again ignored the shadow's mockery. Yakumo stared at Sasuke for a moment longer, not knowing that her cheeks were turning red. She looked around the clearing again. She and Sasuke's clearing. A small smile crept onto her face. It was funny just a few months ago. She would have thought nothing of this place. It was just one of many spread throughout the forest. Was it a nice place? Yes, it was, and certainly worth coming back for. But it had been nothing special. Then she met Sasuke, and they hung out here every day since. This forest clearing had become more just a place. It was something special to them, their little space separate from the rest of the world. Sure, others like their friends were free to visit it. But there seemed to be a silent agreement among their friends. This forest clearing belonged to Sasuke and her. It was their forest clearing. They were just guests here. She felt more at peace here than anywhere else. Her gaze came to the two figures watching over them and having a private conversation. One was Kurenai, and the other was a member of her clan. A man a bit younger than her uncle. Ever since her uncle found out about her secret meetings, he had insisted on having at least one member of the clan to watch over them. For a while, Yakumo had been so afraid that one day her uncle ordered her to stop seeing her friends and lock her up in the compound for the rest of her life. If that did ever happen, she would do everything in her power to escape. Thankfully that never happened, and just this morning, her uncle felt like a completely different man. Yakumo suspected that Sasuke had something to do with it. This morning he seemed so much more open to the idea of her having friends, and, to her surprise, the night before, he gave her permission to tell them about the Edo. That had been a surprise to her. At first, she thought she had imagined it. Maybe she had already been asleep and dreamt the whole thing up. Then she got confirmation from him this morning. Now she was faced with a decision. Should I tell them? She asked herself. Go ahead, tell them. See what happens. The shadow whispered in the back of her mind. A slight frown jumped onto Yakumo's face. Be still? She started to mentally shout at the thing. Yakumo-san, are you alright? Yakumo was torn out of her thoughts and looked to the source of the question. Hinata was giving her a worried expression. Next to her, Ino had a similar expression. Hinata started to press her fingers together and repeated her question. Yakumo-san, are you okay? Yakumo blinked, not really understanding what the girl was asking. What do you mean? She asked. I'm fine. I think. Hinata didn't seem to be convinced. Nor was Ino. What she means is, the platinum-haired girl started. That ever since you got here, you've been in a kind of funk. Funk? Yakumo questioned. That seemed like a strange word for the Ino to use. Yeah, the girl said. You've been quieter than usual and barely responded to anything we've said. Come to think of it, I don't think you've responded to Sasuke all that much today. And you two are about as close as you can. Ino exclaimed. It seems like you got something on your mind. Hinata nodded. If there's anything we can do to help. Can't you tell us? She asked, sitting down next to Yakumo. Ino mirrored the action sitting on the opposite side. Yeah, we're your friends. She said with a smile. If there's anything we can to help, we'll do it. So, just tell us. Yakumo felt the traces of a smile tugging at her lips. I guess I do have a lot on my mind. She said. The doubt was still mauling at her. This seemed like the perfect opportunity to tell them. But I'm not sure if you can help me. Sure, we can. A new voice entered the conversation. Yakumo looked up, seeing that the boys had also gathered around her. When had that happened? The question had come from Naruto. It's like Ino said. We're your friends. If we can help, we'll do it. He said. Kiba nodded, showing he agreed with the blindfolded boy. Akamaru was resting on his head and gave a supportive bark. You can tell us anything. Choji said for once, not eating away at his favorite bag of chips. Shikamaru yawned. To be truthful, it would be troublesome to get us involved in your problems. But it would be more troublesome not to get involved. So, tell us. He avoids the sharp glare from Ino. Sasuke was the last to speak his support. We're all worried about you. He said. Especially me. So can't you tell us? Yakumo wasn't sure how to respond. Her friends were so supportive of her, offering her words of encouragement and support. But would they be like after she told them the secret of her clan? She heard dark laughter in the back of her mind. Go ahead, listen to their honeyed words. Buy into their false promises. They're just waiting for the right moment to plunge the dagger into your back and twist it around. Tell them, and you'll see. Yakumo fought off the annoyed frown that tried to overtake her lips. Go away. She shouted in her head. For once, she didn't get a response. It doesn't have anything to do with your uncle, does it? Hinata asked. It was then that the tension in the air became palatable. Naruto had a frown on his face. Kiba was baring his fangs, and Akamaru looked like he was trying to suppress a growl. Shikamaru's eyes narrowed, but otherwise, his face remained passive. Even Choji seemed to struggle to keep his friendly demeanor. But Sasuke's reaction was the most startling to Yakumo. It remained completely passive, showing no trace of emotion. But somehow, Yakumo knew there was more going on under the surface. He hasn't done anything? Has he? Sasuke asked calmly. The tone of his voice almost felt icy. That bastard! Kiba roared. He smashed a fist against his hand. Just tell us what he did, and we'll beat the crap out of him. Kiba, language. Ino said, shooting the feral-looking boy a heated glare. But I agree. If he's done anything, just tell us, and we'll help. Who knows, maybe he'll suddenly embarrass himself out in public. Or suddenly get a black eye. You know. Naruto started. I haven't pulled any good pranks lately. I'll ask Dad to ban him from all of our restaurants. Choji said. Troublesome. Sasuke just remained silent. But behind his eyes, Yakumo knew he was planning something. Yakumo didn't know when she started to do it, but she was chuckling. Her friends were willing to help her and go up against her uncle for her sake. Even when he has nothing to do with it, at least not completely. Her friends gave her weird looks, so she decided to clear the matter up. No, my uncle hasn't done anything. She said. You sure? Sasuke asked. Yakumo nodded. Yes, he's been better of late. No, something else is occupying my mind. So, what is it then? Ino asked. Come, you can tell us. I'm trying to decide if I should tell you all something. Yakumo said. It has to do with my clan. She explained. Your clan? Sasuke questioned. Yakumo nodded. It's a secret that my clan has guarded closely. The others around her stiffened. Coming from different clans, they all knew what it was like to keep secrets. Even Naruto, not being of a clan but taken in by the Hyuga, seemed to understand the gravity of what she said. Choji was the one to speak. Are you sure it's okay to tell us? Yakumo nodded. It has to do with why I've been isolated from the rest of the village. My uncle gave me permission to tell you. He told me if you could accept me after learning about it. Then he would allow and even support me in having friendships with you. For a moment, Yakumo felt her cheeks heat up. Namely you, Sasuke. She said. Madame? Sasuke asked, getting a nod. Well then, just tell us. Naruto said bluntly, getting a glare from Ino. Naruto. Ino said. Naruto looked at her. What? He asked. She said her uncle would let us be friends if she told us. Ino opened her mouth, but it was Shikamaru's voice that answered. It's not if she told us. It's if we would accept her after she told us. And that's why she is afraid to tell us. He looked over at Yakumo. She is afraid we'll abandon her. Yakumo couldn't find the words to explain herself, so she just nodded. She knew that they all were her friends. That Sasuke was her friend. All of them were wonderful, good people, and she was lucky to have met them. Why wouldn't they accept her, embrace her for who and what she is? Good friends were supposed to accept and support one another. At least that's what Kurenai told her. Yet some small part of her was still so very afraid. These people were her first and only friends, she didn't want to risk losing them. Especially Sasuke, she didn't know what she would do if he turned against her. It didn't help that a certain shadow was egging her on. Naruto looked like he was about to say something. But to the shock of everyone, Sasuke was the one to speak. That's stupid. He said loudly. Not really a shout, but louder than he usually was. Though judging by the looks of the others, it may as well have been a shout. We're your friends. Why wouldn't we accept you? He asked. But. Yakumo began, shocked at the hated look she was receiving from the boy. The expression in his eyes was a mix of surprise, understanding, disappointment, and something else she couldn't identify. No buts. Sasuke said. You think we've been pretending to be your friends, don't you? That we're just waiting for the right moment to drop the act and start laughing at you? He asked. Getting muted silence from Yakumo as she opened and closed her mouth several times, at a loss for words. Well, we're not. We're not pretending to be your friends. We are your friends. What is eating at you? Whatever you're afraid of. We'll be there for you. Because we care about. I care about you. His voice began to crack from the emotion seeping into it. So, please tell us about it, and we'll help you. We'll accept you. Silence fell over the group as Sasuke's words sunk in. She wasn't aware of it, but tears were streaming down from her eyes. After a moment, it was Ino who broke the silence. He's right. She said, a somber smile on her lips. We are your friends. And we'll help in whatever way we can. Naruto nodded a thoughtful smile on. We don't care what secret you and your clan have. We'll be there for you. Hinata was pushing her fingers together. You don't have to be afraid. We'll help you. She looked over at the two adults watching them. And I'm sure that Kurenai-san will be there for you too. She added. The others were quick to add their support for Yakumo. Akamaru jumped down from Kiba's head and walked to Yakumo's lap, where he laid his head down, giving a support bark. Yakumo's hand reached out and began to stroke the puppy's fur as tears continued to drip. Thank you. Yakumo said. You're all such wonderful people. I don't deserve to have friends like you. Sasuke frowned. You do. He said. You deserve to have friends. You deserve to live a normal life surrounded by people who care about you. In the back of her mind, the shadow was shouting. Don't you listen to them. They're deceiving you. She blocked out the noise. She looked up at Sasuke, noticing for the first time that her vision had become blurred. You're right. She said, wiping the tears from her eyes. She couldn't let fear rule her forever. Sooner or later, she would have to face her fears. And she wanted to face them with her friends at her side. with Sasuke there for her. All right, I'll tell you. Sasuke and others sat around her. She looked at all of them, seeing their supportive and eager expressions. How did she get to be so lucky? It has to do with my clan's abilities. She began. That was about as far as she got when they heard a distant boom. Then everything went wrong. Moments earlier Daichi was smiling to himself. Everything was set. They had their target. They had a plan. They had their escape planned and all the resources they needed to pull it off and get away. A month of planning was about to pay off. Konoha was about to suffer a humiliation, and one day everyone would know he was its architect. Unconsciously his hand went for his headband, the crest of IWA proudly displayed. The shinobi of his former village believed him to be a traitor, but one day they would know that he was more loyal than any of them could hope to be. Hiro should be beginning his attack soon. Sana said. Daichi nodded. Good, the sooner we get this done. The sooner we get out of this hellhole of a village. He said. He and the others won't be coming back, will they? Sana asked. Daichi hid the grim expression on his face. He would be losing 3 of his men today. They were good shinobi, and he hated to lose them. But sacrifices had to be made. He knew that, and they knew that. That was the life of shinobi. They will get the job done. He said. He pointed to the 2 adults watching over the children. I want those 2 taken out as soon as possible. Especially the woman. She doesn't look like much. One of his subordinates said. Daichi suppressed a low growl. Fool, he hissed. Don't you recognize a jonin when you see one? He asked. It was evident by the way she held herself. Most kunoichi he encountered were a joke, in his opinion. Too infatuated with romantic adventures and ill-prepared for the realities of shinobi life. The same could be said about some shinobi he met. This kunoichi was different, she held herself differently. Like how a true kunoichi should. He also recognized who she was. That's Yuhi Kurenai, the genjutsu mistress of Konoha. Sana said. As the name would suggest, her specialty lies in genjutsu. I hear even some Uchiha respect her abilities. His other subordinate looked at him in surprise. Daichi nodded to confirm Sana's information. We'll have to be careful with her. If we don't kill her in the opening moments, start pulsing your chakra every few seconds. If you see any of us start to act strange, try to get us and lay your hands on us. Then channel your chakra into our bodies. That should be enough to disrupt any genjutsu she throws at us. Both of his subordinates nodded at him. Not even a moment later, a distant boom could be heard across the village and into the forest clearing. Daichi's smile turned feral. It was time to move. Without having to give a command, all 3 missing nin sprang into action. What in the world? Kurenai said, whirling around to face the direction of the boom. A chill went down her spine. That was all the time she had before a hail of kunai came down on her. Barely having a second, the young jonin's instincts kicked in. Her body moved just as the hail reached her. She managed to avoid the brunt of the attack, but a few managed to make small cuts into her clothes. Kurenai winced as one of them lodged itself in her shoulder. Ignoring the pain, she pulled the weapon out and used it to parry the next hail of kunai. Then threw the bloodied weapon at one of her attackers. The man dodged and jumped into the air. Katan, Phoenix Bullet no Jutsu. A string of fire bulls vaguely shaped like their namesake forced the man to shift around the air. Kurenai's mind was in overdrive now. She determined that she had 3 attackers on her. Why wasn't the Kurama man helping he? Shit. Out of the corner of her eyes, she saw the corpse of the man she had been talking to not even 5 seconds ago. Dozens of kunai punctured the man's body, and a large stone spear had been rammed through his chest for what must have been good measure. The man's face was twisted into a mixture of shock and pain. Not good. Not good at all. That only left Kurenai alone to face 3 enemy nin. One of which she knew was at least Jonin level. The other she gauged to be mid to high Chunin. Those 2 alone she could handle. The Jonin she might be able to take, depending on where he fell in the spectrum. But with 3 working together and her only backup dead, her odds were not looking good. One of her attackers, a thin-looking man with grayish hair, closed in on her. He drew a short blade and slashed at her. Kurenai was forced to draw out a kunai and parry the attack. Then parry several more slashes. She felt a presence behind her. Her kunai clashed with the man's blade. In that same second, her leg shot out and connected with his stomach. He was sent back, giving Kurenai the space she needed to twist around, avoiding a chakra-enhanced punch. Kurenai slashed at the man's back. But the man, the Jonin, was quick and turned around. Deflecting the attack, he grabbed her wrist and punched her in the stomach. Or would have if it were not for the puff of smoke that enveloped her. Followed by the sound of a log shattering into 1,000 pieces. Sending a silent prayer to the log's noble sacrifice. Kurenai threw a set of kunai at the attacker. He easily dodged the attack and grinned at her. "Nice try," he said. "But you're going to have to do betka," the man suddenly screamed as his body stiffened. He looked around at his body, the surprise and fear palpable in his eyes. Kurenai smiled to herself. The man had fallen into one of her genjutsu. A personal favorite of hers where the victim saw their body be enveloped in a tree. Now she could get in close enough to slit his throat before realizing what was happening. Again, instinct kicked in just in time to avoid a stone spear from running her through. She faced the third of the attackers, a balding man. He was holding a second stone spear which he threw at her. Reacting quickly, Kurenai went through a blur of hand signs and slammed her hands into the ground. Doton, Earth Wall no Jutsu. A slab of earth rose, and the stone spear smashed against it. The stone wall crumbled to show that Kurenai was no longer there. A moment later, she appeared behind the still genjutsu-bound Jonin. A kunai went for his throat. However, the genjutsu mistress was forced to pull back when she felt a pulse come from the man. Cursing under her breath, Kurenai jumped back, avoiding the man's leg as he spun around. Kurenai landed a few feet away, catching her breath. It was at this moment that she noticed the other 2 pulsing their chakra. They knew she was a genjutsu specialist and came in prepared to deal with her. While that did limit her options, she still had plenty of genjutsu in her arsenal that would not be affected by pulsating chakra. If that failed, well, she wouldn't be Jonin if she didn't have a respectable knowledge of ninjutsu. She readied herself for her opponent's next move. It was then that she heard the screaming. Kurenai's eyes widened in shock. She had gotten caught up in the fight that she forgot one very crucial detail. There were children here. Kurenai whirled around to see that one of the attackers, the thin man with the short blade, was charging at the children. Everything seemed to slow down as the man reared his blade back. Then brought it down on one of the boys. Poor Choji was frozen in place by terror as the blade came down on him. Clang! Metal met with metal. Kurenai gritted her teeth as she felt the full force of the blade vibrate from her kunai into her arms. The man might not look like much, but he had a lot of strength. The man was not done, though, as he shot out a fist that connected with her gut. It took everything she had not to cough out a gasp of air. The man reared back his arm for another attack, but this time Kurenai was ready for him. She intercepted the attack and swept out her leg. Rather than have his legs swept out from under him, her attacker jumped back, landing about a meter away. Then was forced to move again as several shuriken were thrown at him, followed by a dozen small fireballs. Now that there was some distance between her and the attackers, Kurenai risked a glance at the children. They were terrified, that much she could be sure of, and she could not fault them. Except for Naruto and Sasuke, they had never seen a shinobi in action, let alone a battle between them. Not to mention that this was Konoha. They were supposed to be safe here and not have to fear for their lives. Which brought her a question that had been running through her mind since the beginning of the battle. How in the hell did 3, possibly more, enemy shinobi manage to get into the village without getting an all-expense-paid trip to TNI? If she got out this alive, she would have some words with the Hokage about village security. That, however, was for later. Now she was barking out orders at the frightened children. "Get out of here!" She shouted at them. Most of the children broke out of their frozen states. Naruto and Sasuke were already recovering before the others. They looked at her, unable to mask their fear. "Kurenai-san, what about you?" Hinata said. Kurenai didn't have time for this. She could feel that the enemy were making their next move. "Run!" Shouted at the top of her lungs, deflecting half a dozen kunai thrown their way. Finishing a set of hand seals, Kurenai cupped her hands and blew. Katan, spiraling flame vortex. A twisting arc of flames shot out, consuming and melting the stone bullets, and spun towards the enemy. The 3 attackers avoid the twisting line of flames just as it reaches them, leaving a patch of the ground in flames. Kurenai didn't have to look back to know that the children weren't there anymore. She could hear their rapidly fading footsteps. Please leave the children be," Kurenai mentally pleaded to the 3 attackers. She wasn't sure how well she could protect the children from 3 high-level shinobi. But her pleas went on deaf ears. The attackers, rather than come after her, charged at the fleeing children. This confirmed her suspicions. That boom they hear just before the attack must have been a second group of enemy shinobi attacking the village. She didn't even want to think about the casualties they inflicted on the civilians before every shinobi in the village, from the lowest genin to the deadliest ANBU, responded to an outrageous attack. It would never occur to them that the attack was a distraction from the enemy's true goal. The children. They were after the children. Kurenai gritted her teeth and charged in to intercept the attackers. Now the question was, which of the children were they after? There wasn't a lack of options as all but one were the heirs to major clans. 2 of which possessed the 2 most coveted dojutsus in the world. Then there was a certain blonde Jinchuriki to factor in. Kurenai noted that it was no small coincidence that the attacking Nin wore IWA headbands. Had IWA somehow learned about their Jinchuriki and decided to take him for themselves? Or worse yet, learned about his heritage and were trying to take vengeance for what his father did in the Third Shinobi War? Both were likely to lead to war. There are so many questions to be answered, unknown factors at play here. Kurenai intercepted the enemy's attack on the children. A blade screeched across her kunai and cut into the side of her arm. She ignored the pain and the subsequent screams from the fleeing children. She sent the short blade-wielding man back with a palm thrust to his chest. Then block a kunai strike from the attack jonin. The man smiled at her, a gesture that seemed equal parts mocking and respectful. "You really do live up to your rank as a jonin," he said. Kurenai returned the smirk. "So do you," she said. "And your men aren't half bad for a couple of chunin." The man chuckled at her remark. "You know, it is rare that I meet a kunoichi that lives up to the name. Especially one that gets her name in the bingo book. Yuhi Kurenai, the Genjutsu mistress of Konoha." Kurenai frowned at that piece of information. While she was proud of the title she had been given, she knew how dangerous it was for a shinobi to become widely known. Especially when their name hinted at their specialty. "So, you have heard of me?" Kurenai said. She was careful to keep herself between the 3 attackers and the fleeing children. If they could just get to the forest, they might stand a chance of getting away. Holding a kunai out, Kurenai carefully eyed the men. As I said, it's not every day I meet kunoichi that can live up to the name. The Jonin said. So, I think I'll cut you a deal. Kurenai raised an eyebrow. She had a suspicion about what this deal would be. Her answer would be along the lines of, no way in hell, and over my dead body. The man made his proposal. Hand over the girl, and we'll leave you and the rest of the kids alone. I'm afraid you'll have to be more specific than that. Kurenai said, fishing for more info. There were 3 girls among my charges. At the same time, she fought back the repulsion that was building up in her. She didn't even want to imagine what they would do to any of the girls if they got their hands on them. The man smiled, thinking he had her or knowing she was only stalling for time. The brown-haired one. That was when Kurenai's heart dropped. No, they couldn't mean the Kurama girl. Hand her over, and we'll leave you in peace. The Jonin offered. Kurenai's eyes narrowed at the man. If she could, she would have disintegrated the man with a look alone. I see. She commented. Pray to tell, what could IWA possibly want with the Kurama clan? I thought there would be more tempting targets in our little village. The man kept his smile. Who says IWA is doing this? He said. So, he was a missing nin. Kurenai had mixed feelings on that. On the one hand, it meant there wouldn't be a war with IWA. On the other hand, it didn't resolve her current predicament. It also raised the question of who hired them and for what reason they wanted the Yakumo. There was also the possibility that the man was trying to mislead her. Sometimes she really hated the mind games that her profession involved. So, what's it going to be? The man asked. Do you give us the kid, or do we have to take her? The missing nin didn't even have to wait for a second as a kunai sailed towards his face. His head tilted to the side, letting the weapon fly past him. I'll take that as. Then exploded next to his head. Smoke engulfed the group of 3. Kurenai was already in motion even before she saw the charred log fall to the ground. Not even a moment later, a fist collided with the ground, creating a small crater. The attacker, the big muscular one, sprinted towards her, throwing out his arm. At the same time, a second attacker, the thin-looking man, charged in with his blade out. The genjutsu mistress parried both attacks. The blade with her last kuniya and the arm with a leg. The 3 remained locked in for half a second, then became a blur of motion. Much to her dismay, Kurenai found herself quickly on the defensive. As she dodged, parried, countered, and feinted against the moves of her opponents. But Kurenai was not a close-quarters specialist. She preferred her action to be at a distance where she could trap her enemies in a genjutsu and/or shot of a ninjutsu. Try as she did, attacks were getting through her guard. One moment she felt the tip of a blade glide across the surface of her arm. The next a palm clipping a leg. Kurenai gritted her teeth. If she got out of this, she would have to up her training. Maybe a few sessions with Guy would help. It wasn't helping that she wasn't fully focusing on the fight. She had quickly noticed that the third attacker, the Jonin man, hadn't joined in on the brawl. It didn't take a genius to figure out where he was going. Or who he was going after. If she had the time, Kurenai might have cursed the man. Her 2 attackers continued to press in on her. Kurenai needed a plan and needed it right now. Or at least something to go in her favor. That something came in the form of what sounded like zapping noises in the air. The sword wielder was quick to react. He broke from attacking Kurenai, jumping back and using his blade to slash at the bolts of blue light. The hell? He shouted. The other attacker was not so quick on the upkeep. 3 of the bolts landed on him before he broke off from Kurenai. One had clipped past his right arm while the other 2 burned into his back. Thank you, Naruto. She thought, briefly gazing up at the eyeballs as they continued to fire off bolts of chakra. Just as quickly, she turned her attention back to the bigger one of the two attackers. He was desperately trying and failing to dodge the attacks. He hadn't figured out where the attacks were coming from. Kurenai intended to have it stay that way. The instant the kunai left her hand, she went through a motion of hand signs. The man noticed the kunai coming even as a bolt glanced him in the shoulder. He jumped to the side. Right into the path of the kunai, where it lodged itself into his throat. Horror and surprise spread across his face as his hand went for his throat and held it up to examine his own blood. "Jen," he said before his eyes rolled back into his head, and he fell over. Kurenai didn't waste time examining her handiwork. She turned to face the sword-wielding man. She was disappointed to see that he had managed to figure out where the bolts of Churka were coming from and was actively slashing at the floating eyes. If she had looked more closely, she would have seen a few on the ground sliced in half. As it were, though, Kurenai charged in at the man. The man noticed her coming at him and turned to face her. But he had been too slow to react, and Kurenai's leg connected with the side of his head. He was sent back, stumbling on his feet. He looked at her in time to see her finish a set of hand signs. At that very instant, he made the mistake of looking into her eyes. "Sleep," she said. Surprise quickly turned to panic as he held his hands up to form a sign. "Sleep," Kurenai said more forcefully. The man's arms slumped to his sides. For a few more moments, he tried to fight off the genjutsu-induced sleep but failed in the end. He fell over his body, hitting the ground with a surprisingly loud thud for such a thin-looking man. Kurenai glared at the man, momentarily tempted to slit his throat right then and there. But she held off, knowing the action would waste precious time. Besides, Anko and the rest of TNI would love the present. Without another thought, Kurenai turned away from the man and went after the kids. She was relieved to see that the children had almost reached the forest. Then relief turned to concern when she saw the last of the attackers was almost on top of the kids. The only reason he wasn't already was probably because he was playing with them. A mistake Kurenai hoped to capitalize on. Putting every bit of chakra she had into a burst of speed, she flew across the clearing. The remaining missing nin had good instincts and noticed her closing the distance. The man smirked at her, showing a detectable mild sense of respect. The man started to go through a series of hand seals. However, his focus was not on Kurenai. The genjutsu mistress narrowed her eyes at the man, knowing he was forcing her to make a decision. "Damn you!" she cursed him. She changed her course and came between the missing nin and the fleeing children, just in time for the attacker to finish the last hand sign and for a whip made of earth to slam into her. Then everything turned black. Sana woke with a jolt. He looked up at Daichi, giving him a nasty glare. For a moment, he was confused, then the memories of the last few moments before he lost consciousness came flooding in. The fight with the Konoha Kunoichi, Toji dying. And the bitch putting him under a genjutsu. Sana frowned. "She got to me," he said bitterly. Daichi continued to glare at him. "It appears that way," he said evenly. Then he turned to face another direction. Getting up, Sana looked in the same direction and suppressed a smile. Slumped over a tree that had a human-sized dent in it, was the kunoichi he fought. "But I got to her." Sana picked up his discarded sword. "Is she dead?" he asked. He couldn't tell if the woman was still breathing at this distance. "She'll live," Daichi said to Sana's disappointment. "But she won't be waking up for a while," he explained. Sana's grip tightened on the hilt of his blade. "Shall I finish her?" he asked. Daichi shook his head. "No, I have something else in mind for you," he said. "I want you to go after the children and get our target. Or is that going to be too much for you?" Sana held back the embarrassment he felt. "No, sir," he said. What should I do with the rest of the children? He asked. Daichi shrugged. Do what you want. Just as long we get our target, I don't care. He said. Now, get moving. I'll handle Toji. With a bow, Sana sprinted into the forest after the children. It didn't take him long to catch up with the little brats. It wasn't that hard to track down many frightened children, even if they came from shinobi families. Sana smirked to himself. He might not be able to get his revenge on the kunoichi personally by killing her. But he could get it by offing the kids she tried and failed to protect. With that thought in mind, Sana leaped down from a tree branch and aimed his sword at the chubby-looking one. He fully intended to cleave the boy in two. Choji, watch out. One of the kids called out. The chubby kid didn't even question it and leaped to the side, barely dodging Sana's blade. He looked in the direction of the voice. To his surprise, the warning had come from the blindfolded kid. How did he know Sana was about to attack? Before he could think about it, he heard a sound he had recently become familiar with. Using his blade, Sana deflected a hail of chakra bolts. In the air, he saw more of those strange floating eyes. Deflecting more bolts, he glances at the blindfolded boy to see more pairs of eyes floating around him. So, the rumors were true. Konoha had gained a new Genkai Kekkei. Certainly, an interesting if disturbing ability. No matter, Konoha would soon lose this new power, assuming the boy was the only one with it. Sana held his blade out and sped towards the boy. He deflected a couple more bolts before a flash of light briefly blinded him. Brat! Sana cursed before his sight quickly returned, and he sliced through the offending eyes. Then his blade went through the boy's neck, and Sana got a brief glance of a panicked expression on the child's face. Before his head fell off and his body hit the ground. Sana briefly enjoyed the sounds of horror from the other kids before he finished them off. Leaving only the target left alive. Tears were streaming down her cheeks as she backed slowly away from him, her eyes locked onto the corpses of her friends. Sana sheathed his blade and walked toward the girl. She backed into a tree. Stay away from me, she said. Don't be scared, Sana said. I'm not here to kill you. Now be a good little girl and come with me quietly. The girl pressed herself into the tree, shaking her head. No. 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 You killed my friends. Sana frowned and grabbed the girl by her shoulder. Little girl, I may not be here to kill you. But I can make you suffer if you don't do as I say. He growled at the frightened child. Now, are you coming with me, or do I have to use more persuasive means? To illustrate his point, he tightens his grip on the girl's shoulder, pressing hard into the bone. The girl whimpered in pain and slowly nodded her head. Sana smiled. Good girl, he said. Now, let's get going. Wouldn't want to keep the boss waiting? Would we? Pulling the girl away from the tree, the two began to walk through the forest. For a moment, the girl looked behind her and seemed to whisper something. Sana was having none of it and shoved the girl forward. Move it, girl, he growled, getting a frightened whimper from her. The girl picked up her pace, and soon enough, they left behind what he believed was a pile of dead children. Konoha Forest Sasuke woke up feeling a sharp pain in his neck. He rubbed the back of his neck, trying to get rid of the soreness even as he sat up in his bed. Sasuke frowned when his other hand landed on the bed to push him up. It felt unusually hard to him this morning. He curled his fingers, feeling something gathering around them. He turned over, laying his head on something that wasn't his pillow. He must have turned in his sleep. He looked at his hand to see what the odd substance was. He blinked, then rubbed his eyes with his free hand thinking that his sleepy mind was playing tricks on him. He looked at his hand again and saw a ball of dirt and grass. He looked around, seeing that he was outside in a forest. Again, Sasuke blinked, so either Shirshu had pulled another of his pranks, probably got help from Naruto. In that case, there was hell to raise. It was too early in the morning to be dealing with their shit. Or he chose to sleep out in the forest for whatever reason. Maybe he had trained so hard last time that he simply collapsed from exhaustion and didn't wake until this morning. Not the first time it's happened. He sat up and did the only thing he could at the moment. Recall everything that might have led him here. He woke up yesterday morning and ate breakfast with his family. Still an awkward affair, but things were getting better. Then he met up with his friends and went to the academy. After, he and a few others came to the forest clearing and met up with Yakumo. After that. Sasuke frowned as he could recall what happened after that. He could remember talking to the girl and getting into a sparring match with Naruto. But after that, everything turned blurry. For some reason, he felt a sense of growing dread. Sasuke took a deep breath, remembering what his brother taught him to do in situations like this. He exhaled and played the moment over again in his mind. He did repeatedly. He repeated the process until the fog over his mind began to clear. Sasuke was confused. The events that were playing out didn't make sense. One moment he and the others were talking to Yakumo. Something about a secret her clan had. Then the next, they were running. Running from something, fear overtakes them and forces them to move with every step. He recognized that fear. It was the same one he felt when the memory shifted again. A shadow descended on them. It shifted between each of his friends, each one falling to the ground as it moved. Then it came to him. There was a glint of light. And that was everything snapped into focus. Sasuke gasped as his hand flew to his neck. They had been attacked. A group of men, Shinobi. But not Shinobi of Konoha. He remembered running even as Kurenai fought them off. He remembers holding tightly to Yakumo's hand, dragging her along with them as they tried to make their escape. But one of the attackers caught up with them, and Sasuke's eyes almost bulged out of their sockets, and he threw his hand to his mouth to hold back the bile. He ignored the taste of dirt and grass that mixed in. That glint he saw had come from a sword. A sword that had come down on him and separated his head from his shoulders. He and his friends were dead. They dead. Dead. Sasuke felt the world around him twist and spin. His breathing became erratic even as the bile and some dirt went back down his throat. But threatened to return. Sasuke forced himself to breathe evenly. Alright, Sasuke, just calm down. Take a deep breath. He told himself and did as he was told. Exhale slowly. He breathed out. Breath in. Breath out. Breath in. Breath out. Slowly he felt his senses return to him. He still felt like the world was about to come crashing down on him. Just remember what Itachi taught you. Keep breathing and analyze the situation a piece at a time. First up, determine if he was dead or not. His hand was still wrapped around his throat. A throat that still had a head attached to it. Just to be sure, he slowly moved his hand up, and never more relief did he feel his chin. Then his mouth and cheeks. That was good. Very good. It meant he still had a head on his shoulders, literally. That meant he was still alive. Oh, Kami. He hoped he was still alive and hadn't woken up in the afterlife. No, he wasn't going to think like that. Just for the moment, he was going to assume that he was still alive. Okay, with that out of the way, Sasuke felt a lot calmer. He got to his feet, even though his legs felt wobbly. They hadn't gotten the memo that they were still in the realm of the living. Next, he had to determine if his friends were still alive. He looked around the area to see the prone bodies of his friends. They all still had their heads, and no pools of blood surrounded them. And they looked like they were still breathing. He walked over to Naruto and placed his fingers on his neck. Sasuke let out a sigh of relief when he felt a steady pulse. He shook his friend awake. Naruto's head began to stir, and he was sitting up a moment later. Sasuke could already feel one of his pairs of eyes on him. Sasuke? Wah. Not right now. Sasuke cut him off. Let's wake the others, and then we can figure out what's going on. Maybe 10 minutes later, everyone was wide awake. Everyone except for Yakumo, who was missing. That worried Sasuke more than anything else. Once everyone was awake, the discussions began. Okay, so does anyone know what the hell happened to us? Ino all but shouted. I don't know. Choji muttered. But I think we. The boy looked pale as he tried to say what he thought. His hands were rubbing around his neck. We died. Shikamaru said calmly. Or at least it felt like we did. Choji gulped but nodded. Everyone remained silent as the thought registered in their minds. Naruto was close to Hinata, comforting her. Ino leaned on Choji, looking like she was about ready to fall to her knees. Shikamaru was sitting on the ground with his hands grasped together. Kiba was holding onto Akamaru tightly. Hinata was the one to break the silence. Do you think we really are dead? She asked softly. Barely loud enough for everyone to hear. You think we might be in? She trailed off, not wanting to finish her statement. Shikamaru shook his head. No, I think we're still alive. Somehow. He said. I don't know why, but call it a gut feeling. Sasuke nodded his head. He was inclined to agree with the Nara. Not just because he didn't even want to think about the alternative. But there was something else telling them they were alive. He kept playing that exact moment repeatedly in his mind. The moment when he and the others supposedly died. Every time he did, it shifted slightly until finally, he had two completely different versions of the event. One where the attacking shinobi sliced their heads off. Another where he twisted his blade around at the last moment and smashed the hilt on the back of their heads. Sasuke's hands went from feeling around his neck to the back of his head, where he felt a bruise. He looked over to see Shikamaru was doing the same thing. Naruto had a frown on his face, the kind that said he was thinking of something. So, both boys had caught on too. Now the question was, why were two different versions of the same event playing out in his mind? Sasuke's eyes narrowed as he tried to think of the possibilities. But all he could think about was Yakumo. She was missing and nowhere in sight. Yakumo, Sasuke muttered, feeling like there was something there. Then the answer flashed into his mind. Genjutsu. He said, feeling his eyes widen. He looked over at Shikamaru and knew he had come to the same conclusion. Ino looked at him in a funny way. I'm sorry, Sasuke-kun. But what did you say? She asked. Genjutsu. Sasuke said, looking at everyone. He was getting confused looks from everyone except for Naruto. It looked like he was starting to work things out. We were all placed under a genjutsu. One made to make it look like we all died. Shikamaru explained. We didn't really die. It just felt like we did. That man only knocked us out. Relief flooded over everyone as they realized that they were all still alive. Even Sasuke felt calmer about it. Even though he reached that conclusion earlier, it just felt nice to have it confirmed by someone else. Okay, Kiba said. So why did the guy place us under a genjutsu? Why not kill us for real? He asked. Yeah, Ino joined in. Why make us suffer through that and not actually kill us? What is he, some kind of psycho? Shikamaru shook his head and stood up. No, he wasn't the one to place us under the genjutsu. He dusted off his legs and exchanged a glance with Sasuke. Sasuke nodded, starting to see where the Nara was going with this. It made his stomach churn. He was under the same genjutsu. So, he thinks he killed us. Choji had a confused frown on his face. Okay, now I'm really confused. If he didn't do it, then who did? It was Yakumo. Sasuke said. She was one to cast the genjutsu. She saved all our lives. And now she was gone. Sasuke felt like he was going to be sick. And I think I know when she did it. Shikamaru said. He walked over to Naruto. Naruto, do you remember that flash of light just before he knocked you out? Naruto nodded. I do. He said. Everyone else nodded as well. Good, Shikamaru said. Now that doesn't happen to be a new technique of yours. Is it? The blindfolded boy shook his head. No. I don't have anything like. Then he began to rub his chin. Though thinking about it, it does sound like something that could be useful. I'll have to work on it when we get back home. Glad I could be of help. Shikamaru said. He turned to face everyone else. See where I'm coming from? Kiba answered. I think so. That flash of light we all saw was Yakumo casting a genjutsu on all of us. Including that guy who was trying to kill us. Shikamaru nodded, pleased that someone had thought up the same thing. She cast that genjutsu to make it look like we all died. She saved all our lives. Ino had a full-blown smile on her face and whooped in joy. You go, Yakumo. Give me a high five. She said, shooting out her hand. Then looked around, confused, when nothing else happened. Guys? Where is Yakumo? She asked. That was when everyone else noticed the absence of their friend. They all turned their heads, looking for any sign of the Kurama girl. She's gone. Sasuke said, almost choking on the words. What? Ino asked. She's gone. Sasuke repeated himself. They took her. They took Yakumo. Ino's hands flew to her mouth as what he meant sunk into her mind. There's no way. She denied. You've got to be joking. Maybe she was further ahead of us when we got knocked out. Ino tried to reason. Yeah, that's it. She's probably still close by. We just got to look for her. Right, guys? She looked around. Right? No response. Ino deflated as the silence was enough to tell her she was wrong. Yakumo was gone, and they had been powerless to stop it. Sasuke sunk to his knees. He had been powerless to stop it. Just like he was powerless to stop his clan from tearing itself apart. Why? He looked up at Hinata. Why did they take her? Because she was the one they were after. Shikamaru said. Why else would they be here? They had to be after one of us. It's the only reason that can explain why they attacked us in the clearing. But what about that sound we heard? Choji asked. It sounded a lot like an explosion. Shikamaru nodded. That's probably because it was. If I had to guess, there were two groups of attacking shinobi. One that attacked the village, and the other that attacked here. The first was obviously a distraction. Something to keep our forces busy while the second conducted the real objective. Shikamaru's eyes narrowed in disgust. That's horrible. Hinata said. Summing up everyone's thoughts on the situation. How many people had these shinobi killed just to get to one girl? How many more were they willing to kill to keep her? Yakumo must have realized this at some point. Shikamaru said, rubbing his chin. Or maybe she didn't and figured she would be knocked out with the rest of us. Either way, she sacrificed herself to save all of us. Sasuke balled his hands into fists. Sacrifice? Shikamaru made it sound like a noble thing to do. To him, it was anything but. Yakumo didn't have any choice in the matter. She didn't choose to sacrifice herself to save all of them. She was forced to, and because of it, she was gone. Sasuke would never see her again. He would never see her smile. He would never see her paint again. He would never hear her laugh or cry. Yakumo would never be able to live a normal life. She deserved better than that. Sasuke got to his feet, his eyes narrowing in determination. "I'm going after her," he said. The others looked at him in surprise. Except for Naruto and Shikamaru. Shikamaru didn't show any outward expression, but Sasuke knew he was thinking. Not that he cared much for what he thought. Naruto, though, just had a smirk on his face. "What do you mean going after her?" Ino said incredulously. "It's as he said," Naruto said with a fox-like grin. "He going to rescue his girlfriend. And he'll do it by himself if he has to." Sasuke didn't have the patience to argue with Naruto about Yakumo being his girlfriend. They weren't, they were just friends. So, he just nodded. "But that's crazy," Ino said. "He can't take on those shinobi by himself." Naruto's grin grew wide, placing his hands behind his head. "If it helps, I'll be going with him. And I imagine that I won't be the only one." He looked over at Kiba. The Inuzuka boy had a feral grin on his face. "That's right," he said, smashing a fist into his hand. "We'll pummel those freaks into the ground and save Yakumo." Ino's mouth was gaping open. "You guys are crazy," she said, but her confidence was wavering. "You honestly can't expect to beat those guys. They're shinobi. Real shinobi, and you guys are still in the academy. How can you expect to take them?" "But we're the only ones that can save her," Sasuke said. "We're the only ones that know what's going on." "But shouldn't we tell someone else?" Choji suggested. "Finally, someone that's talking sense," Ino said, shooting the boy a thankful look. "He's right. If we can get back to the village, we can tell someone what's going on. They'll bring it to the Hokage, and he'll send someone to rescue her. But it might be too late by then," Sasuke said. "But," Ino began. Sasuke sharply cut her off. "Look, I don't care if any of you come with me. But I'm going after the shinobi that took Yakumo and rescuing her." With another word, he walked off, ignoring the blonde-haired girl's protest. Not even a second later, he heard a familiar set of footsteps beside him. "Don't hold it against her," Naruto said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "She's just scared. She's not used to situations like this. Not like you and Mean. Or Hinata." More footsteps joined them. "I'm not scared," Ino's voice said. "I'm just trying to be the sensible one here. We're all here for you, Sasuke. Right, Hinata-chan?" Naruto said. Naruto-kun." The Hyuga girl begins in a nervous voice. "I'm not going with you." Sasuke turned to face the girl, giving her the look of surprise that the dope had on. "But why not Hinata?" Naruto asked. "Don't you want to rescue Yakumo?" Hinata nodded. "I do. But, she trailed off." "But what?" Naruto pressed. "I'm worried about Kurenai-sensei," she said. It was then that Sasuke felt a stab of guilt. Not once since he woke had he thought about the older woman and her well-being. Everyone else shared glances. "She was fighting those shinobi when they attacked us," Choji said. "You don't suppose she's—" Silence fell over the group as none of them wanted to complete that thought. "We should split up," Shikamaru said. Sasuke and the others looked at him for an explanation. One group goes after the shinobi and tries to rescue Yakumo. The other looks for Kurenai and brings her to the village. and warns the rest of the village about the kidnapping. Sasuke summed up. Shikamaru really was a genius. The Nara boy nodded. We already know the Hinata will be in the second group. But who else will be joining her? No one was surprised when Ino spoke. I'll go. She looked around at the others with a smirk. As I said, I'm the only sensible one here. Well, okay, not the only one. She said, sending a wink to Hinata. It looks like sense only runs in the females of the species. I'll go with the girls. Choji said after some hesitation. I'm not sure how much use I'll be in rescuing Yakumo. Finally, a guy with some sense. Ino said. But it's nice to know we'll have some muscle to help us carry Kurenai. Alright, anyone else want to go with them? Shikamaru asked, looking around the group of friends. Okay, group 1 will be Naruto, Kiba, Sasuke, and me. We'll go after the attackers and try to rescue Yakumo. Group 2 will be Choji, Hinata, and Ino. You three will find Kurenai and take her back to the village. You'll also warn the rest of the village of the attackers' true goal here. Understood? Everyone nodded. Then let's get going. Hey, wait a minute. Ino said. Sasuke groaned. What is it now? The Yamanaka wasn't going to back out now, was she? I know you're all gung-ho about rescuing Yakumo from the attackers. Ino started. But how exactly are you going to find her? You can't rescue her if you don't know where she and the kidnappers are. Sasuke opened his mouth. Then closed as he realized Ino made a valid point. How were they going to rescue Yakumo if they couldn't find her? A chuckle got everyone's attention. Sasuke and the others look over at the source. Naruto had one of his trademark fox grins on. Leave that to me. He said. Konoha, abandoned warehouse, move it, girl. One of Yakumo's kidnappers pushed her into the abandoned warehouse. Careful, Sana. One of the others said. She suspected he was the leader of the group. We don't want to damage the merchandise. A cold chill went down her spine when the man said that. Her mind raced at all the possibilities these men had for her. None of them good. She heard a low groan from the other man. I don't think our client will mind a few scratches and bruises. He said. Still be careful with her. The leader said. Don't want to give our client any reason to reduce our pay. Especially with how much he is willing to give us for this little girl. There were others in the building. For men, all of them wearing headbands like her kidnappers. The crest of IWA was presented proudly. At first, she wondered what IWA wanted with her and why they were risking war. Then she heard some of what the two men that had kidnapped her said. From that, she began to suspect they weren't affiliated with IWA, at least not anymore. Missing Nin, she had been kidnapped by a group of Missing Nin. A group of Missing Nin had been hired to kidnap her from her village. She didn't know if that was better than IWA coming after her. 4 other men greeted the small group. Ah, Daichi. A big burly man said. I see that you returned with our prize. Where's Toji? Dead, the leader, Daichi, said calmly. What of the secondary group? Have they returned? The big man shook his head. They failed to make the rendezvous. I suspect they're dead now. Daichi nodded, seemingly undisturbed by the news. I figured as much when I sent them out. Did they stir up plenty of trouble before they were taken out? The burly man smiled. Blew up a whole block of builds before ANBU and some jonin got to them. During the fight, they managed to set fire to a couple of other buildings. Yakumo looked on in horror as the man continued with his report. How many people had they killed? According to our contact, practically half the village's shinobi are swarming the area. While the other half are running around looking for signs of more attacks. The man with the short blade hummed. That'll make things difficult for us. Not as much as you think. The missing nin leader said. Konoha is readying itself for another attack. They won't be looking for signs that someone will be trying to get out of their village. All we have to do is lay low for a few days. Then we'll slip out while their attention is focused elsewhere. He then grabbed Yakumo by the shoulder. Still, I would have liked for the others to have survived. But a smaller group will have a better chance of getting out of Konoha. Take the girl and put her in a secure place. Yes, sir. The burly man said. Come on, little girl. You're coming with me. He grabbed her by her arm and started to drag her. Signal for our contact. I want to discuss the next phase of our plan. A moment later, she was thrown into a room with some crates. When the door shut, the young girl began to cry. I'm so sorry, she said, sending the thought to her friends. Hopefully, they would be waking up at any moment now. Deep in the recesses of her mind, a shadow smirked. Outside the abandoned warehouse, so that's where they're hiding. Kiba muttered. The boys were hiding out in some trees close to the abandoned warehouse. They had separated from Choji and the girls after they found Kurenai. Beaten and bruised but thankfully alive. That had come as a relief to the children with everything that was going on. Naruto nodded his head. Yeah, my eyes saw the kidnappers enter a while before we arrived. Sasuke paid little attention to what the others were saying. Instead, his focus was on the abandoned building not far from them. It was not as abandoned as everyone would have liked it to be. His eyes narrowed, that was where Yakumo was being held. Where the kidnappers were doubtlessly planning their next move. Every fiber in his being wanted to leap down and run into the building. Cut through everyone that got in his way, find Yakumo, and get her out. After that, he wanted to set fire to the building and let the kidnappers burn. His father once told him that passion ran deep in their clan. It was one of the reasons why the Uchiha betrayal had happened. Until now, he had found that hard to believe. The more rational parts of his being had started to take over a little bit after he and the others had set out to rescue the Kurama girl. He knew that he would only get himself and his friends killed if he did that. What use would he be to Yakumo then? Right now, was the time for careful planning rather than bold and reckless action. He had already dragged himself and his friends into enough trouble as it was. He didn't want to make things worse. Kiba stood up and looked like he was about to charge into the building. Come on, guys. Let's go. Then was dragged down by an irate Shikamaru. That was rare. How troublesome do you want to be? He hissed. You go in there, and you'll get us all killed. For real this time. Kiba sat up, crossing his arms. Akamaru crawled into his lap. I know that, he said. I just wanted to get a closer look at the place. See if there was any way in. And what? Shikamaru questioned. Hope that you find a way without being caught? Kiba looked away, letting out a low growl. Look, it's frustrating not being able to do anything, he said. Our friend is being held in that warehouse by those bastards. Kami knows what they're planning to do to her or what they're doing now. Sasuke held his breath for a moment, trying to suppress the red he saw. He didn't want to think about that. Think about what Yakumo could be going through and the horrors she would face if they failed to rescue her. We need a plan, Sasuke said just loud enough for the others to hear. Some way in without the kidnappers finding us and getting Yakumo out. For that, we'll need to know what we're dealing with, Shikamaru said. Naruto, do you think you can use your eyes to spy on the kidnappers? The blindfolded boy nodded. I'm sending in some of my eyes now. Just give me a moment. For a few agonizing seconds, the group of boys waited in silence. Then Naruto spoke. All right, I'm in. Good, Shikamaru said. First off, can you see where they're holding Yakumo? Sasuke could almost feel his ears twitching at that question. Yeah, I can. Naruto said. She's being held in a small room somewhere on the right side of the warehouse. It has some crates, but I can see her. How is she? Sasuke blurted out. Is she okay? Is she hurt? Did they do something to her? The questions came out fast and frantically. He needed to know that the girl was all right or not. Naruto answered the questions calmly. She's okay. I don't see any obvious sign of being hurt. At least not physically. Relief flooded through Sasuke at hearing Yakumo wasn't hurt. What's she doing right not? Sasuke asked. She's curled up near some of the crates. Naruto paused for a moment. She's crying. He said. That, more than anything else, cut deep into Sasuke. He wanted to be there, next to Yakumo. To embrace her and tell her that everything would be okay. That she will get out of that situation and live a long, happy life. It was frustrating not being able to do that. He felt a hand on his arm. He looked over to see that Naruto was giving him a comforting expression. Don't worry, Sasuke, we'll get her out. There was no sign of wavering in that voice. No doubt that could be heard. Naruto had said not as reassurance or as a false promise. He said it like one would say that the sky was blue. It was a matter of fact. They were going to rescue Yakumo. Sasuke smiled at his best friend and nodded. Thanks, Naruto. He said. Okay, Shikamaru began. Now that we know where Yakumo is and that she is okay. Let's see what we're up against. Naruto, can you see how many enemy shinobi there are and where they are? Naruto nodded. I think about 6 of them, including 2 of the attackers. Only 2 of them? Shikamaru asked. Where is the third? Dead. Naruto said calmly. I saw Kurenai-sensei kill him before we got to the forest. I see. Shikamaru said evenly. Perhaps a bit disturbed by how causally the blonde said that. So, we're dealing with 6 shinobi. Wait, what about that explosion we heard? Kiba asked. That had to be another group. Should we worry about them? Shikamaru shook his head. I strongly suspect that they're either dead or have been captured now. I think Shika's right. Naruto said. I got some eyes on where the explosion happened. The areas swarmed with our guys. I didn't think had that many ANBU in the village. How bad is it? Kiba asked. Naruto remained silent for a while. It was disturbing to see the normally happy trickster acting so serious. It's bad. Naruto said. A lot of buildings have been leveled. I say about a block, and several others look like they're still burning. And the people. Naruto trailed off. Let's just say I'm glad none of you are there to see it. Sasuke gritted his teeth. How many innocents had these monsters killed? How many were suffering right now because they wanted to kidnap one girl? What made Yakumo so valuable that they went to such lengths? IWA is going to pay for this. Kiba growled, summing up Sasuke's thoughts. I'm not so sure IWA is behind this. Shikamaru said. Kiba and Sasuke looked at the Nara like he had gone crazy. Are you serious? Kiba asked. Didn't you see the headbands they were wearing? I say it's obvious that IWA is behind this. Shikamaru shook his head. They may be wearing those headbands. But that does not mean they are from IWA. We don't have enough information to determine who is behind this. He explains. But that isn't important right now. What is getting Yakumo out of there. He's right. Sasuke said. Once we rescue Yakumo, we can figure out who they are later. As much as he wanted to learn who had hired these men, Sasuke, more than anything else, wanted to get his friend out of that place. Shikamaru nodded. So, let's assume for the moment that we are dealing with 6 enemy shinobi. He said. Naruto, can you see where they are? I can. Naruto said. 5 of them are in the warehouse. 1 is by the door to the room where they're holding Yakumo. The rest look like they're bunched together in the center of the building. I can see where the 6th went. He sort of vanished a moment ago. Shikamaru hummed. He's probably outside, keeping a lookout. The Nara boy looked out at the warehouse. Looking into his eyes, Sasuke could already see that the boy was starting to make a plan. He hoped it would be a good one. Okay, Naruto. Now that we know who and what we're dealing with, let's try to find out what we're working with. In terms of how we'll get in. I want you. Hold on, guys. Naruto said. What? Kiba asked. Did you see something? Someone just entered the warehouse. Naruto said. A 7th member? Sasuke asked. How many of them were there, and how did they all get into the village? I'm not sure. Naruto answered. They're wearing one of our uniforms, Chunin, I think. They could be someone sent in to spy on the village. Shikamaru suggested. Could help to explain how they managed to get in. Sasuke didn't know why, but he felt like that the Nara had something more to say. Another explanation for why the newcomer was wearing a Konoha Chunin vest. Can you see who they are? Sasuke asked. I think so. Naruto answered. They look familiar. I think I might have seen them around the village. Hold a moment. I'm going to try and get a closer look. Just be careful. Shikamaru said. We don't want to tip these guys off that we know where they are. A scoffing noise escaped from Kiba. Yeah, right. Like anyone would expect a bunch of floating eyeballs to spy on them. The others ignored the brash boy's comment. Okay, I'm getting a good look at his face. Naruto said after a moment. Then, the blindfolded boy stiffened as his face contorted into a look of confusion. No, it can't be. Not even he would. He mutters. Naruto, what is it? Shikamaru asked. Who do you see? Do you recognize them? The confusion melted away and gave way to something Sasuke rarely saw on Naruto's face. Anger, genuine pure anger. Yeah, I recognize the bastard. Naruto said. And I hope I won't be able to recognize him after Anko's done with him. Who's Anko? Naruto, who is it? Guys, you're not going to like this. It's Mizuki. Forest and Konoha silence reigned as Hinata, Ino, and Choji carried an unconscious Kurenai through the forest. Choji was holding the young woman by her shoulders while Ino carried her legs. Hinata walked in front of them with her Byakugan activated and scanning the area. We're almost out. Hinata reported as she saw some buildings come into view. Relief was flooding through her. Soon they would be safe again, and they could warn the rest of the village of what was happening. Choji just nodded, while Ino looked like something else was occupying her mind. The Yamanaka did try to hide it, but Hinata could see it. Nothing could be hidden from the eyes of Hyuga. Hinata didn't have to wait to ask her friend what was wrong. How? Ino asked. Hinata stopped in her tracks. So did Choji, almost causing Ino to drop Kurenai. Ino? Hinata questions. How? Ino repeated her question. How did this happen? How did a bunch of enemy shinobi get into the village? How could they be allowed to attack us like that? How can something like this happen in Konoha? We're supposed to be in the world's biggest and strongest hidden village. Shouldn't we be safe here? Hinata bit on her lip. She fully understood where Ino was coming from. She knew that outside the village walls, anything could happen. But behind its wall, Konoha was supposed to be safe. A place where no one should have to worry about their safety. She knew what that felt like. And she knew how it felt like when that sense of security was suddenly ripped away. She still remembered the night of her kidnapping vividly. I don't know. Hinata answered honestly. The questions that Ino asked had plagued her that night and still did to this day. How could she feel safe in the village knowing things like that could happen? Ino remained silent as she digested what Hinata said. Is this what you felt like when Kumo tried to kidnap you? She asked, getting a slow nod from Hinata. Kami, I can't even imagine what Yakumo must be feeling right now. Scared. Hinata answered. Flashes of her kidnapping appear in her mind. The fear, the loneliness she felt. The utter despair consumed her when she realized that no one would save her. Scared and lonely. She's probably thinking right now that no one's going to save me. I'm never going to see my family. See my friends again. I'll never be able to come home again. She could hear the trembling in her voice. Then a smile formed on her lips as the next set of memories flashed by. A boy her age, thin, dirty, and barely dressed, launching himself at her kidnapper. He had saved her that night, even if it cost him. He had been a bright shining light in a time of darkness for her. She owed everything to Naruto. You think Sasuke and the others will be able to save her? Ino asked. Hinata was not surprised when her answer was yes. There was no doubt in her mind. The boys would save Yakumo even if it meant they had to storm the gates of hell. She just prayed that none of them would have to pay a price like Naruto had. The group of three started to move again. Only to be stopped when a shadow descended over them. Hinata's heart raced as, for a second, she thought they were being attacked again. She relaxed when she saw that the figure was an Anbu, wearing a Nico mask. What are you three doing out here? The woman began. Don't you know we've been attacked? It's dangerous to be out here. Then she looked over at Kurenai. Is that Anbu-san? Hinata said, getting the woman's attention. Kurenai-sensei needs to be taken into medical care right away. And we got something that needs to be brought to the Hokage urgently. Abandoned warehouse, storage room, how pathetic. Yakumo ignored the voice in her head. She was sitting up against one of the crates with her legs pulled into her chest. Her eyes and cheeks were red from all the crying. They were still streaming down, which was surprise to her. She thought they would have dried up a long time ago. Just look at you. The shadow continued to mock her. Weeping like the wretch you are. Did you genuinely believe that things were starting to go well for you? That the world was finally beginning to accept you? That you could at last leave that little cage of yours? Bah! Don't make me laugh. You're a witch. Shut up. Yakumo mentally cried. The world will never accept a monster like you. The shadow continued with its rant. You cause nothing but misery and suffering for everyone around you. It's no wonder that your clan tried to lock you up. You should have stayed in your cage, like a good little bird. Shut up. But you want more. You want to leave your safe little cage and fly out into the world. You dared to hope that the world would accept you, even though you know you are a monster. A demon who relishes in the suffering of others. Shut up. I bet those so-called friends of yours are glad you're gone. They're probably celebrating as we speak. That's not true. That's not true. Yakumo sobbed quietly. They're my friends. They were going to. They were. They were going to do what? The shadow mocked her. Accept you for what you are. You were about to tell them about little old me, weren't you? You were going to tell them about the true extent of your powers. And like the naive little child you are, you hoped they would accept you. The shadow began to cackle. Shut up. How foolish of you. The voice continues through its cackling. How could anyone ever accept a witch? A demon who causes nothing but misery and suffering wherever she goes. Once they learned the truth, realized what you are, they would have turned on you. Handed you over to your kidnappers with smiles on their faces. They would have never accepted you. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. Yakumo ragged at the shadow. A fresh stream of tears poured down her face. Or what? The shadow asked cruelly. You'll cry like a baby? A little late for that, aren't we? Face it, girl, you were never destined for happiness. The world cannot abide by people like you. It will do everything it can to crush you under heel and make you suffer for what you are. No friends. No family. No one to love you. If the truth were ever to get out, everyone would hate and scorn you. Yakumo said nothing to the shadow as she sobbed into her arms and legs. She wanted to rage against the demon. Tell it that it was wrong, bury it deep within her mind so it may never see the light of day again. But a part of her started to wonder. Was it right? Did she deserve to suffer, to be alone in the world for her whole life? Had she done something wrong in a previous life and was now paying for it? Would Sasuke and the others have accepted her after telling them the truth, as she had hoped? Or would they have done what the shadow suggested? Turned on her. Scorn her for something that was beyond her control. Would Sasuke have said he hated her? Yakumo felt like a jolt shot through her. Suddenly she found herself wishing she had never left her clan's compound. Never have gone outside and enjoyed the world her uncle tried to deny her. Perhaps she did deserve all of this. Within her mind, a dark shadow began to smile. Oh, but Yakumo-chan. It said in a sweet voice. It doesn't always have to be this way. I can make things better. You can? Yakumo asked. I can. The shadow answered. I can make all your pain and suffering go away. If you would do just one little thing for me. What is it? Yakumo asked, desperate for any kind of release. Accept me. The shadow said. Embrace what I am and what I have to offer. Let me take over while you retreat to the deepest recesses of your mind. There you can create a world of your own. A world where you don't have to know the suffering of any kind. A world where you can truly be happy. You can have friends, a family. And perhaps even someone who could love you. It will be your little paradise. All the while, I'll make this world pay for everything it has done to you. I don't have to be your enemy. Accept my offer, and you will never suffer again. She reached her hand out. It was so very tempting to take the shadow's offer. So very tempting to withdraw from the world to a place where she couldn't be hurt. It would be so easy just to take its hand and dream of a better world. Her hand stopped as a moment of hesitation took over. An image flashed into her head. Sasuke turning to face her, a smile spreading across his lips. Behind him, all his friends welcoming her with warm smiles. She said, the uncertainty growing within her. She felt the shadow's irritation. Accept my offer. Don't hesitate. But she didn't hear the shadow. Thump. Yakumo almost jumped when she heard the noise. She stood up, facing the direction of the sound. She heard some more sounds coming from behind the crates. She looked over the door, wondering if her captors had heard anything. She half expected one of them to come in to investigate. When she saw no one coming in, she turned her attention back to the source of the noises. Listening closely, Yakumo started to make out some voices. Could you be any louder? Sorry, by that vent really didn't want to move. Damn it all. You're going to get us all caught. Me? You're the one who's yelling. Quite dope. Team, would you both be quiet? You're both troublesome. Yakumo couldn't believe it. Those voices, they couldn't be. There was no way. A figure emerged from behind the crates, and Yakumo almost felt like crying. This had to be some cruel dream. Another trick from the shadow. She would wake up and find that he wasn't really here, and she was still alone in this room. The world was not that kind to her. Sasuke looked around the room and caught sight of her. Surprise and relief flooded over his face. Yakumo, he said. He seemed so real that it felt cruel to Yakumo. Couldn't this dream end already? Let her face reality, because that would be less painful than what she is facing now. Her crying continued. This can't be real. She muttered. You're not real. Concern spread across Sasuke's face. Yakumo felt a stab of pain in her heart. She didn't want to see this anymore. She wanted this cruel nightmare to end. But before she could do anything, Sasuke vanished from her sight. Then she felt something envelop her. Arms wrapped themselves around her, and a pair of hands cradled the back of her head. Sasuke's head was a hair's breadth away from hers. It's all right, Yakumo. I'm here. We're all here. He whispered in her ear. The warmth of his body up against hers. How he held her and the beating of his heart. Him whispering into her ear, and the breath of his voice dancing across her ear. Even the faint scent of the forest and the earth, it all felt so real. It was then the realization hit her. This was real. This was no dream or hallucination. This wasn't even a trick from the shadow. Her arms crossed up from behind Sasuke's back and held onto his shoulders. He was real. He was here. Yakumo began to choke on her sobs. You're real. She said. You're really here. She wasn't sure if her voice was coming coherent or not. But she didn't care, she wanted to enjoy this moment. I know. Sasuke said. But we got to go. He pulled out from the embrace and held onto her hand. Yakumo followed him as the boy pulled on her arm. But where? She asked. Out of here. Sasuke said quickly. We're here to rescue you. Don't listen to him. The shadow said. He's trying to deceive you. A frown tugged at the corners of Yakumo's lips. Shadow-san. Yes. Shut the hell up. Tisk. Sasuke pulled her behind some crates. There Naruto, Shikamaru, and Kiba were waiting for them. She heard a happy yelp. Of course, Akamaru was here too. Next to Shikamaru was an open vent, and a little further away was the hatch. Was that how the group of boys got in? Was that how they were going to escape? Yakumo, Naruto started. We're so happy to see that you're safe. Well, I kind of already knew. A pair of eyes floated down. Eyes everywhere and all. You're all really here. She said to them. But how, and why? Finding you wasn't that hard. Kiba said with a smirk. He pointed his thumb at the small white dog. We got Akamaru's nose. And my eyes. Naruto cut in. Your eyes? Yakumo asked. His followed you. Even while he was unconscious. Shikamaru explained. Naruto scratched the back of his head. Yeah, turns out they can still work even while I'm knocked out. Something to keep in mind for the future. Somehow Yakumo felt that there was more to that explanation. But she wasn't going to press him for answers. As for the why, Sasuke said. It should be obvious to you by now. We're your friends. We weren't about to let these bastards take you so easily. At least I wasn't. Yakumo smiled and nodded. Thank you. She said. I never thought that anyone would come for me. When that man knocked you all out and took me away. I honestly thought that would be the last time I saw anyone I knew. I never thought that you would risk your lives coming for me. Sasuke smiled back at her. As I said, we're friends. Speaking of. When that guy knocked us out, it looked like he killed us. The Uchiha boy held onto his neck. I remember his blade cutting through my neck. Was that you? Yakumo bit her lip. That had been a spear of the moment kind of thing. It was me. She confirmed. I didn't want any of you to die, so I did the only thing I could think of. Well, you have our thanks. Shikamaru said. How did you know that they were after you? Yakumo shook her head. I didn't know. She had believed that the man was going to kill her as well. But he didn't. She knew she had to go with him to maintain the illusion. She didn't want to risk her friends' lives. Well, it doesn't matter now. Sasuke said. Let's get you out of here, and then we can discuss it. Yakumo and the others nodded. The young girl didn't want to spend any more time here. Shikamaru and Kiba crawled into the duct. Naruto gestured for her to go next. She looked over at Sasuke. He nodded. Go ahead. We'll be right behind you. He said. Crawling down into the duct, she heard the shadow speak. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's mine to make. She said. She got no response. So, are Hinata and the others waiting for us outside? I didn't see them come in with you. Yakumo asked after a few seconds of crawling through the ducts. No, they wanted to bring Kurenai back to the village. Shikamaru explained. Yakumo felt like something hard had formed in her throat. The last she saw of her sensei was her fighting the attackers. Then one of them came for her and her friends. She wasn't sure if she wanted an answer to her next guest. But she had to know. Is she okay? Kurenai-sensei, I mean, is she? She was unconscious when we found her. Naruto explained. She was in pretty bad shape. But Hinata said she would be okay, so as long we got her to the hospital. No words could begin to describe the relief Yakumo felt when she heard that. Kurenai-sensei was okay. Her friends were okay. Maybe, just maybe, things would turn out for the best. A light shined ahead of Yakumo. She moved towards that light, and a moment later, she crawled outside of the ducts. She stood, noticing that the duct had led them outside the warehouse. She dusted herself off and was ready to move out of the way. Yakumo! Naruto's shout came too late. The Kurama was pinned to the wall above the duct. Thought you could get away from us? The swordsman that caught her said in a low growl. Yakumo struggled against the man's breath and wondered why Shikamaru and Kiba weren't jumping to her rescue. She got her answer in the form of loud grunts. Both boys were pinned down by two more of the attackers. Shikamaru remained still while Kiba thrashed against his assailant's grip. Yakumo, what's going? Sasuke's question was cut off when he screamed in pain. Instinctively Yakumo looked down to see if her friend was okay. She bit back a gasp. Sasuke was halfway out of the duct, pinned to the ground. With a sword stabbed into his shoulder. I thought I killed you little brats. The pale swordsman said, twisting the blade around. Sasuke screamed. No, please. Stop. Yakumo gasped out. But events were already in motion. She saw two flashes of light. In an instant, the man shifted. His foot was pressed onto Sasuke's back, and his blade was held out in the air. Two thin wisps of smoke came off it. Yakumo didn't have to look to know that several of Naruto's eyes were surrounding them now. The swordsman looked ready to deflect more of the chakra blast. I think that will be enough. A new voice said. Yakumo was able to get a look at the source of the voice. It was the leader of the group. He walked through the alleyway and examined the scene. His eyes landed on Yakumo for a second, giving a smirk before they shifted to the vent below her, where Sasuke was. I assume our other guest is in that vent behind the Uchiha boy. I'm also willing to bet they are the one controlling the floating eyeballs. Yakumo's silence was answer enough for the man. A neat little trick. I had heard that Konoha had gained a new Kekii Genkai. He said, looking directly at one of the pairs. However, it won't be enough to save yourself or your friends. The man made a hand gesture. As fast as Yakumo could blink, Shikamaru and Kiba had kunai to their necks. The swordsman had the tip of his blade pointed at the back of Sasuke's neck. If you can hear me, have a pair of your eyes float down to me. No tricks or your friends die. Half a second passed before a pair of eyes floated down in front of the man. He smirked. Now, I suggest that you do as I say. One of my men here will drag your friend out from that vent. I want you to crawl out and surrender yourself to us. If you try anything, your friends will suffer the consequences. Don't listen to him, Naruto. Sasuke's plead was cut short as the swordsman pressed his foot in his back. Bastards! Kiba shouted, only for his captor to tighten his grip around his neck. The leader shook his head. Got a feisty bunch here. Does Konoha bother to teach you kids manners? He commented. Now, then nod twice if you agree to my demand. A few tense seconds passed before the pair of eyes nodded twice. Smart kid. He nodded to the swordsman. The man returned the nod, putting his blade away. He grabbed Sasuke by his shoulders, ignoring his protests, and pulled him out from the vent. Yakumo and others waited with bated breath to see if Naruto would do as the man said. A part of Yakumo hoped he would find a way to get away so he could warn the rest of the village. The other more sensible part hopes he would, to spare everyone else more pain and suffering. She felt relief and defeat when a head of blonde hair poked out from the vent. Naruto stood up a second later, dusting himself before raising his hands in the air. Not a moment later, one of the kidnappers appeared behind him and held his hands behind his back. The leader of the kidnappers glared at Yakumo. I hope you enjoyed your moment of freedom, little girl. Because it will be the last time you will ever experience it. He grabbed her by the shoulder and pushed her forward. Now move it. The boys joined Yakumo as they were escorted into the warehouse. I'm sorry, Yakumo. Yakumo heard Sasuke say. She glanced over and almost winced when she saw him holding his bleeding shoulder. We failed you. Not only had she been caught again. She had dragged her friends down with her, possibly to join her in the same fate. No, I'm sorry. If only she had listened to her uncle. Next time, we keep a better eye on them. Daichi growled. His men nodded in response. They didn't want to incur his wrath. I assure you, Daichi. The girl will not escape again. Sana said. I will hold you to that, Sana. Otherwise, I may have to rethink your use to me. Of course, sir. Sana responded. Still, what I don't understand is how those boys are alive. I could have sworn I killed them all. Daichi clicked his tongue. Isn't it obvious? You were placed under a genjutsu. Sana looked confused. But didn't you take care of that Kuno? Not her. Daichi cut the thin man off. The girl, our target. She's from the Kurama clan. They are known for their powerful genjutsu. So powerful that their victims are known to hurt themselves. The trait most have bred true with her. She cast that genjutsu to save her friends. One of the others scoffed. Well, it was obviously a wasted effort. Those idiots came right to us. Don't mistake courage for stupidity. Daichi said. Need I remind you that they almost managed to get away? Had we been any less observant, we have to explain our failure to the client. And Daichi a suspicion that the client did not take well to disappointment. So, what will we do with the boys? Someone asked. I say we kill them. Sana suggested. For real this time? Daichi shook his head. No, they'll be more useful to us alive. In case you hadn't noticed, 3 of those boys are from prominent clans. The boy with the duck hair is from the Uchiha clan. The boy with the mutt, an Inazuka. And the lazy one, couldn't be any more Nara if he tried. What of the 4th one? Sana asked with an edge in his voice. Daichi began to rub his chin. Other than the Yamanakas, I don't recall a clan of blondes. However, if rumor is to be believed, he is the bearer of a new Kekkei Genkai, an interesting one, to say the least. He could already think of several uses that such an ability could have. And he had no doubt that the boy was watching them now. They would have to be extra careful. They're more valuable alive. Are you thinking of using them for ransom? One of his men asked. Or do you want to sell them off? Daichi smirked. No. Even better, we had them off to IWA, and those 4 will be the start of powerful new clans in our village. The others smiled as well, seeing where he was going with this. I hope those 4 enjoy the touch of a good woman. Toma said. Because that's all they'll be good for when Iwa's done with them. I'm almost jealous. Daichi nodded, glad his people were catching on. Reach out to our contact here. We'll need to inform him of the change in plans. His smirk grew. The future was looking very bright for him. Hokage Tower Sarutobi's chamber was a whirlwind of activity. Someone explained to me how something like this. He pointed to the destruction out his window. Could happen? He tried to keep his voice even, but his ears could hear how loud he was. He was proud of himself for keeping his ki under wraps. Otherwise, his shinobi would be cowering before him more than they already were. We don't know, sir. A jonin said. That was not the answer Hiruzen was looking for. Before he could rebuke the man, Shikaku came to his rescue. Obviously, there is a breach in our security. A hole we hadn't noticed before, or the Nara had hesitated for a moment. Or they had someone on the inside helping them. Now that felt like a gut punch to Sarutobi. There was a chance that someone in his village had caused this. I want this hole found and plugged, he said, setting the notion aside for the moment. He would deal with it if and when he came to it. For that matter, I think it's about time we re-evaluated our entire security perimeter. If there are any other holes, we must find them and close them up. The Nara nodded. I'll get to work on it right away, Hokage-sama. Hiruzen nodded. He trusts Shikaku to get the job done. All right then. He started. What do we know of the attack and the attackers? An ANBU stepped forward. Hokage-sama, there were 3 attackers in total. All of them wore IWA headbands. Sarutobi's eyes narrowed. That didn't make any sense. Shikaku seemed to think the same thing. Hokage-sama, if I may? Hiruzen motioned for him to continue. I don't think it was IWA behind this. Granted, I don't think they are above committing a crime like this. But even they would not be so bold as to attack us like this. That Sarutobi could agree with. IWA might hate them and wanted war, but Inoki was craftier than this. If he wanted to start a war, he would have attacked somewhere else. Are you saying someone else is behind this? A jonin in the room asked. Shikaku nodded. I am. IWA is not ready for a war against us. It doesn't make sense that they would be behind this. Shikaku is right. Sarutobi said. We should not assume anything or rule anything out. Inoki, if you really are behind this, I don't care what it takes, but I will have your head mounted on my wall. Continue your report. The ANBU nodded. The attack occurred in one of the busier commercial districts. The enemy used a combination of explosive tags and Katon jutsus in the initial attack. They then proceeded to use Doton jutsu to cause further damage. The causality reports are still coming in Hokage-sama. But so far, more than a dozen have been confirmed killed, with more than 100 civilians injured. Hiruzen's stomach felt like a bottomless pit. So much death and destruction was caused by 3 attackers, and there could be more lying in wait. And for what? Was there some purpose behind this attack? A greater goal they had hoped to achieve? Or had they done this simply to harm his village? He needed answers. Were any of the attackers captured? He asked. The Anbu shook his head. No, Hokage-sama. He said. 2 of the attackers were killed in the battle that followed. The 3rd killed himself before we could capture him. Sarutobi suppressed a sigh. Then we will have to put the village on high alert. There's a chance we may suffer more attacks. I want. Before he could finish giving out his orders, the door to his office opened. An Anbu with a Nico mask walked in. Hokage-sama, I'm sorry to interrupt. But there is someone you need to talk to. Behind her were 3 children. Choji, Ino, and Hinata. Hokage-sama, there's something we need to tell you. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. Guys, make sure to help the author by visiting the link in the description. This is Fox Sage, and I'm signing off.